English translation 369th contact. Friday, 12th November 2004, 02 Parzad 8 hours.
Be greeted, dear friend. This time, unfortunately, the correction work was a bit laborious, because I was very tired, having spent 2 days and 2 nights sleepless because I was busy with research work in Southeast Asia, where a great catastrophe will happen on the 26th of December. You and Bernadette have probably noticed that I was struggling with fatigue. In the meantime, I took a 2-hour rest and have now recovered somewhat.
No one could blame you for also being tired. I'm also sometimes overcome by tiredness. But be welcome and greeted. What disaster is lurking in Southeast Asia on the 26th of December? And before I forget, could you ask Quetzal about what he promised me on his last visit?
Regarding my research into the coming unfortunate event, I will explain some things to you later. Quetzal was able to fulfill your wish. He was able to arrange everything as you requested.
That is good, and it makes things a lot easier. If it is okay with you, I would like to put everything in writing on the computer right away, so that the matter is clear.
Of course.
It will take a minute, so the infernal machine is already speaking. Now if you want to tell me what we can do. I will not include what I said in the report. I will just note it down and discuss it within the group. You may begin.
That will be good. Then listen.
That is all.
Yes.
That helps us a lot. Thank Quetzal for us all. But what I wanted to ask you, on your last visit you said something about undiscovered murders in Switzerland and Germany. Then you also said something about China and locusts, and in relation to the Philippines and Japan and Europe. It was about AIDS, storms, and earthquakes. You also made a remark about the Netherlands, but I do not remember what it was. However, as our conversation on this matter was purely private, it was unfortunately not mentioned in the report, and I think that it might be right for us to talk about it officially after all.
Yes, the Netherlands. About 3 weeks will pass before Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands departs out of the life at the age of 93. To the other matters, I would like to say the following. Although it is not to be expected that it will be useful to speak openly about it, because all the years since we have been in contact, all the predictions have come to nothing. The Earth humans continue in every respect in the old style and change nothing for the better. The planetary destruction of the environment continues, as do the wars and the increase in overpopulation. But I still want to comply with your wish and take up what has been said again. With regard to undiscovered murders, I was talking about the fact that about 400 murders are committed annually in Switzerland, and about 4,500 murders are committed annually in Germany or in the part of the old Federal Republic of Germany, which can never be proven as such because of carelessness on the part of the doctors and the police, and no suspicion of the existence of murderous crimes has been raised. In this regard, inexperienced doctors issue death certificates based on false causes of death, while the competent police authorities handle their investigations so carelessly that they overlook or misinterpret all signs of the murders. Greed, hatred, jealousy, and inheritance-seeking are the main reasons for these undiscovered murders. Regarding China, it has to be said that, of course, the AIDS epidemic is also rampant in this country, and millions of people are already infected by it, which, of course, is not officially admitted. In the near future, however, it will be the case that those responsible will take a stand on the problem of the AIDS epidemic and publicly admit that the AIDS problem is also rampant in China. However, on the one hand, the numbers of people infected with HIV are deliberately played down, and on the other hand, It must be said that the real and very large number of people infected with AIDS in China is unknown. Also, the number of people infected by AIDS worldwide is not correctly recorded by the earthly organizations, because in a very short time the epidemic has spread much faster than ever before. According to our investigations and records, there were 67,418,613 AIDS-infected humans on Earth by the date of 3rd November 2004. In China, the problem will now be openly addressed, and official measures will be taken against the epidemic, which the Chinese population will have to accept.
This is a huge step forward for China. On the other hand, with regard to the undiscovered murders, it is terrible. Humans are killing other humans without being held accountable. And all this can still happen to this extent today, even though forensic science is so advanced that even years later it can still reveal traces of murders and other crimes and prove murders and crimes. But just where there is no plaintiff, there is no judge either. By which I mean that if a murder is not recognized, then no efforts are made to clear it up. It is quite obvious that the many murders are committed in ways and means and with methods that leave no traces and so are not recognized either by the responsible doctors who issue the death certificates or by the police.
This can indeed be said, because these are the decisive facts. But keep listening. With regard to the locusts that I have spoken of, it turns out that the gigantic swarms that appear in the African region also reach as far as the territory of Israel and even as far as the Canary Islands. There will be many millions of locusts. And what I mentioned with regard to the earthquakes was that Japan will continue to be classified in a whole series of such events, and the whole thing will not come to an end for a long time, as will be the case in Asia, in the Orient as well as in Europe, as will be the case in Switzerland, in Italy and in Germany in particular, although the other states will not be spared from it either. Nor will the African, Asian, and the entire North, Central, and South American continent, although enormous volcanic eruptions will also cause a great deal of disaster worldwide. Australia and New Zealand will not be spared from all these events, nor will many areas in Oceania and on the islands of Micronesia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Hawaii. In the end, however, the whole rest of the world will be affected. Just as the Philippines will be hit by severe storms or typhoons in the coming weeks, causing much disaster and destruction, this will also spread to the whole world. If in the last years the storms have become enormous in their gay vault, that which is above all might and force, due to the blatant climate change, whereby for some time now the blame has been largely due to the irresponsibility of the Earth humans and can no longer be attributed to normal natural processes, then in the coming time everything will become much worse and get completely out of control if the Earth humans do not finally come to their senses and very quickly and radically change everything for the better in order to prevent the worst from happening.
The irresponsibility of the United States in its rejection of international climate protection and the bombing, etc., that it is carrying out in Iraq, etc., is also one of the things that is causing untold and irreparable damage to nature and the planet itself. When, at last, reason takes hold of the Earth human, and he or she really does deviate radically from the path of their destruction, then, unfortunately, a great many things will already have been destroyed and annihilated to such an extent that they cannot be reversed and cannot be made good.
This corresponds to reality and cannot be denied, unfortunately.
Is it possible that you are now explaining things in relation to your research in Southeast Asia, precisely in relation to the impending catastrophe you spoke of? It would also be interesting to mention a few more important things that are going to happen before the end of this year. Extraordinary things, I mean.
I want to still talk about my research, but we did not want to mention future things because the predictions did not bear fruit.
Yes, but Maybe one or the other person is concerned about it, which then causes a change of heart.
From this perspective, you may be right. Then I will reveal the following. Apart from a powerful seaquake disaster in Southeast Asia, there can actually be no talk of extraordinary events up to the end of 2004, rather simply of a few things that are commonplace and therefore have no particularity. We have already spoken enough about the various damaging natural events that have already been discussed on various occasions, which are largely due to the fault of Earth humans, as well as about the irresponsible criminal military and political machinations of various states. So let me turn to what is known as avian flu, which the irresponsible humans in charge claim that this disease cannot and will not break the species barrier to humans. The opposite is the case, because the breakthrough has already taken place, which has already cost around 40 lives, but which is being irresponsibly concealed, although it is inevitable that sooner or later the fact will become known that bird flu, as we call it, has broken through the species barrier in a special form through direct contact with poultry and spread to humans. Next month, it will also be announced that the disease has spread to humans in Japan in the same form. However, the virus has not yet mutated and is therefore not yet transmissible from person to person. However, the disease has also been transmitted to certain mammals and can possibly spread among them as well as among poultry. This is also known in certain initiated circles, but this is also concealed. Whatever else happens will happen on 21st December, because on that date the Lord of the Isle of Minot, Leonard Count Bernadotte, will depart this life. Further, it follows that in states in the Midwest of the USA, such as Indiana, Texas, Missouri, Kentucky, and Ohio, an unusual snow chaos will break out, with as much snow falling within a very short time as is normally only the case during the whole year, and which will claim a greater number of lives. Heavy snowstorms will also hit Europe, starting in Spain. Immediately following the first snowstorms in Spain, on the 26th of December, two very severe seaquakes will occur practically simultaneously in the Indian Ocean, one in the Bay of Bengal, far below Chittagong, the port city of Bangladesh, and the other not far from Sumatra. The two quakes will also have some effects as severe earthquakes. Large areas of Southeast Asia will be affected, initially resulting in well over 10,000 humans in several countries losing their lives. But this number will increase in the following hours, days and weeks, after which, at the end of the first period, there will be well over 50,000 lives to lose when the first investigations will be carried out. In fact, a total of about 70,000 deaths or more must be reckoned with. Tens of thousands of humans are also washed into the sea by the floods, lose their lives, and are never found again. The exact number of deaths will never be determined because it is not possible to carry out precise checks on persons in several of the countries affected. A very large number of humans will be homeless and countless others injured. A large number of tourists from Europe and other parts of the world will also be dead. Several tens of thousands of animals will also fall victim to the tidal waves, as well as enormous material damage will occur when several dozen villages and tourist sites and buildings are completely destroyed. At the end of the catastrophe will then possibly still be epidemics, if it is not quickly ensured that the masses of corpses are buried immediately. The quakes will be of natural tectonic origin and thus will not be attributed to the fault of the earthlings. The two quakes will reach a magnitude of 9 points on the Richter scale, which means that they will be stronger than the one in the USA about 100 years ago, when in April 1906 an earthquake with a magnitude of 8.3 and a subsequent Great Fire destroyed San Francisco for the most part. The final death toll of all humans who will lose their lives in this great natural disaster will far exceed the number of those who died in the explosion of the volcano Krakatau in the Sunda Strait in Indonesia in August 1883. The two seaquakes in the Indian Ocean are directly linked and will trigger several tsunamis, the first of which will be a tidal wave of about 10 meters, the main effect of which will be to cause a great many people to lose their lives, as I have already explained. Coastal areas will be particularly affected by the tidal waves, especially Sri Lanka and the Maldives, but also the Seychelles, Thailand and coastal areas of India, Bangladesh, Burma, Sumatra, Malaysia, and other areas of Indonesia will be affected, and to the west, the eastern coasts of Yemen and in Africa, Somalia, and Kenya, etc., where the tidal waves will also cause deaths. A number of aftershocks will follow, which will also cause tidal waves, but which will not reach very high levels of force.
You are not being very specific about the dead in this disaster. What do you mean that we can actually expect 70,000 dead or more? Are your statements not based on a prediction?
No, my statements are not based on a prediction, but on a probability calculation which I made according to my research. And what I wanted to say with my words was that the number of dead can very far exceed the 100,000 mark. Then there are also the thousands of people who are dragged into the sea by the floods and killed, and thousands of them are never found again, so that the number of dead can never be determined exactly. This is not surprising, especially since in most of the countries affected, there is no exact population figure known and extremely poor citizen and person registration is carried out.
The two impending seaquakes occur simultaneously, you said. How far apart will they occur?
The two quakes are actually occurring simultaneously and are directly connected to each other. Although they are about 1/500 kilometers apart, but are directly connected to each other in terms of Earth tectonics. The whole thing will be triggered by a tectonic movement or a fault of more than 1,000 kilometers length. The seaquake catastrophe will cause tidal waves of brute force, and everything will be so tremendous like it has never been on the Earth since time immemorial. Here I am speaking exclusively of seaquakes, and not of earthquakes or landquakes that have other effects. And such earthquakes have always been more powerful in terms of their strength and the number of dead.
I think the reason there is going to be so many deaths is because it is completely unreasonable to build houses and hotels right up to the shallow beaches and catchment areas of the sea, and on flat islands that are only 2 or 3 meters above the sea, as is the case in the Maldives, etc. On these islands, everything will probably be swept away just like on other islands and on the beaches. If the humans were not so reckless and irresponsible towards nature, they would refrain from building and living in such places. But in the coming events, as you say, this recklessness and irresponsibility will take its revenge. There should be laws here on the earth, as there are with you, that no shores and no flat islands with houses and hotels, etc., should be built on.
That should really be the same as with us. Neither on banks of rivers, lakes, or seas may any buildings such as houses or hotels, etc., be built. Beaches and adjoining flat areas are included, as well as alluvial areas, etc. Residential buildings of all kinds, as well as other buildings, may only be built above a certain sea level and at a reasonable distance from rivers, lakes, and seas.
We have talked about this before. But can you tell me what else of importance will be after this seaquake catastrophe in Southeast Asia until December 31?
There is actually not much more to tell about that, so I would like to tell you something that happened on Era first. If you want to hear?
I am as curious as a bow and arrow about that.
Then listen. Our spiritual leadership has conducted a survey among the entire population of Era, which includes not only the adults but also the children, with the aim of finding a suitable term for the mission that you and all your fellow comrades in arms are fulfilling, in spite of all the adversities that are being faced.
What is that about?
I was just about to explain. It is a matter of creating a brief and appropriate term for the Aaron Chronicle in connection with the contacts between you and us and in relation to your mission, which is appropriate both to your effort and to the nature of the mission.
Oh, I see. I was beginning to think that we were going to have another adulation.
That is not the point.
Understood. And what did you get out of it?
The decision was based on a suggestion made by an 11-year-old girl who felt that a term like the silent revolution of the truth was appropriate for you, your comrades in arms, and your mission. This suggestion was generally accepted and now finds its way into our chronicle. The girl, whose name is Claudina, also wishes that you should also use her created term.
We can certainly do that, which will be a great honor for all of us. Give Claudina our best regards. It would be a pleasure to meet this girl. What does the name mean?
You will find the name and the meaning in your new name records. The value of the name is who always finds the truth, a meaning that cannot be denied as really applying to the girl.
Such is life. But what about meeting the girl once?
Maybe this possibility can be considered.
In any case, it would be my great pleasure and honor. Well, what I actually wanted to say, when I think about how tourists from all over the world have performed and shown their wealth in all the countries where I have lived, I have to say that it is absolutely not surprising that asylum seekers from all these countries come to Switzerland and elsewhere in Europe. They all think that milk and honey flow here and that there is a life of glory and joy. The tourists, with their affluence and money spending, really encourage people in the so-called poor holiday countries and third world countries to leave their homes as economic refugees with completely mistaken ideas about the prosperity to be expected and to migrate to the industrialized countries. But nobody is talking about that, not even the governments who still support and promote tourism, together with the profit-oriented travel companies which rake in millions and billions. No one is talking about it, and no one wants to believe that global mass tourism is increasingly promoting the problem of asylum seekers, the spread of disease and the spread of crime from poorer countries to the wealthy industrialized states. All of this, in addition to the fact that the cultures of foreign countries are changed and destroyed by this unreasonable tourism, as I myself was able to observe in all those countries where I lived and worked. All these things are not taken into consideration by anyone, and consequently nothing is done about it, which makes everything more and more out of control.
You speak a true word. But no one will listen to it, for the Earth humans are not only stubborn, but also irresponsible, unreasonable, and know-it-all, at least with regard to those who are of the erroneous and wrong opinion that only tourism and holidays in foreign countries bring profit and experiences. There is also the erroneous view that tourism in foreign countries brings profitable growth, earnings, and prosperity for their people. But this is not true, because poverty persists among the population in all countries, because in reality, it is only a few from the population, and above all, big business people who earn a lot from tourism. And of these big business people, it is often those who come from rich industrial countries and make enormous profits with hotels and sports facilities, etc., in the poor countries. In very early times, our ancestors acted in the same wise, creating the same problems as you have called them and as they have existed on the earth for many years, since the populations of the rich industrialized countries have large financial resources that allow them to flood foreign countries with tourists. But nobody cares about the fact that all these problems, as you called them, occur. The whole thing should be stopped in the wise that our ancestors handled it and solved all the related problems, which banned and dissolved all the travel companies and thus also stopped all the mass tourism, which caused a lot of disaster, such as when natural disasters destroyed tourist resorts and killed countless humans. This was indeed the solution to all problems, which then developed into a worldwide cooperation of all political and economic concerns, leading to a worldwide unified technological implementation, politicization and economy, as well as a unified world government, which eventually led to the spiritual leadership and the High Council's advice. Since then, some 52,000 years ago, peace and harmony has reigned among all the humans of our world and throughout our Federation. Of course, there were many other problems to be solved which would go too far to mention, but when reason triumphed and the beginning was made, one problem after another was solved and resolved. The whole process of the rationality lasted 101,036 years, but then everything was sealed.
This rationalizing may take a long time with the Earth human because, as you said, the humans of this Earth are irresponsible and know-it-all. But I would like to add that the majority of the earthly humanity is also stubborn, obstinate, lowly intelligent, and dim-witted, as well as autocratic and catastrophically simple-minded. Unfortunately, a large part of the earthly humanity still consists of hopeless, simple-minded ones, nitwits, naive ones, jesters, simpletons, hicks, fools, and other pinheads who look out only for themselves and for their own profit and pleasure, who know no logic, no rationality, and no responsibility, neither towards life nor towards their fellow humans, nature, fauna, and flora, and towards the planet. And all those who are really capable of rationality, who assume their responsibility and strive to be real and true human beings, are scorned, slandered, and hated by all possible means. But now, dear friend, I would like to address you once again to what the remaining days of the month of December will bring in terms of importance, if anything at all, if there is still anything happening in the world that has to be considered important and worthy of a few more words. By the end of the year and beyond, I assume that the media will only report on the Seaquake disaster, because it will be the sensation of the last 100 years. Other events will probably be largely forgotten.
That will indeed be the case, but just as only this catastrophe will be mentioned at first. So it will also very quickly be forgotten again because Earth humans only then think about world-shattering events of such kind when they are still present. When everything is over, then everything is also very quickly forgotten again.
Unfortunately, this is so, because compassion is as short-lived in the Earth humans as is the sense of responsibility in any regard. But now tell us if there are any other world-shattering things happening in the remaining days of December. And what still amazes me, when you say that the number of dead can very well exceed the 100,000 mark, by how much could that be? And what also interests me, will you continue to monitor events in Southeast Asia? And what is also on my mind, is it not possible, as usual, that you will give a warning to the leaders of all the countries that will be affected by the Seaquake? If I try something along those lines, it will be pointless, because at the most, they will only laugh at me, if a warning from my side would be heeded at all.
Which you are right about a warning from your side. Yes, we are watching the events, but we are not allowed to interfere with them because our directives forbid it. And before you ask, the event cannot be prevented because it will be so enormous that no countermeasures can be taken. The whole thing is based on a process that has been built up over more than 2,700 years and therefore has quite natural causes without human intervention. Unfortunately, the brute force of the two seaquakes will lead to further quakes, Because every seaquake and landquake always causes further quakes worldwide as a chain reaction, especially when such large quakes occur as will be the case in the Indian Ocean on the 26th of December. The process can last for only a few hours, days, or many months, and even years, and they will be inevitable. And as far as the 100,000 threshold is concerned, this also only refers to still inaccurate probability calculations on my part, which I have not yet been able to specify more precisely. If my calculations are correct and the number of 100,000 dead actually reaches or exceeds the 100,000 mark, then it is to be feared that once again up to 130,000 or 145,000 dead must be reckoned with. But in the worst case that can be assumed at present, even up to 175,000 dead or more, which can be caused by the direct and indirect consequences of the two seaquakes alone. Only, as I already mentioned, many thousands of dead will not be found. About which one more word has to be said. If the authorities and the people do not act immediately and take the most urgent measures after what has happened, then there could be many more deaths when epidemics break out.
Will you continue to monitor the coming seaquakes? And how did you actually find out that these two are going to be seaquakes? Did you make a prediction about that?
One of our research groups has been working in the area of the coming events for 3 months and will continue to do the necessary work there. For my part, I will be present at the event and will also observe and analyze everything in terms of research. We have not made a preview, so our knowledge of the catastrophe is not based on it. Our cognitions are based on observations, research, and cognitions regarding the movements of the Earth's crust and therefore the tectonics of the planet. We have been doing our research in this respect on Earth for about 13,500 years, and we are constantly gaining new results and knowledge from which we can calculate when tectonic and other natural events will occur.
So the data is not always predictive. Maybe you can tell me more about it later. But I also see from your words that you make a distinction between landquakes and seaquakes, whereas our earthly scientists usually lump everything together and call everything an earthquake.
I think the most important things have been said, so there is no need to talk about them again later. And my explanations will certainly not bear fruit with the Earth humans either, because soon after the event everything will be forgotten again and will be put into everyday life. Memories of catastrophes have no place in this, at least not with those humans who are personally only slightly or not at all affected by the whole thing. And what can be said about the land and seaquakes can be explained with the following. We distinguish between land and seaquakes mainly by the fact that landquakes cause destruction by brute force, which directly affects the inner and outer structure of the inner and upper layers of the Earth, and consequently visible inner and outer fault lines are created. In contrast, seaquakes cause submarine faults, etc., which trigger tidal waves that roll through the sea at several hundred and even up to 1,500 kilometers per hour and then pile up high on the rising seabed, breaking over the seashore and often far into the land with enormous force and destroying everything above ground. Resistance to the tidal waves can hardly be offered unless stable protective walls or natural land elevations, such as hills and mountains, prevent or mitigate the worst. Such tidal waves can hardly be observed when rolling in the sea, but only when they start to foam when they hit the coast or when they are counterbalanced by the rising seabed and grow to mountains of water, which can be from a few meters to several hundred meters high. In ancient times, the Earth can also look back on tidal waves that reached heights of more than 400 meters and penetrated many kilometers inland, causing primeval destruction. In modern times, when the Earth is no longer in its primeval state, seismic waves can tower up to and over 40 meters. However, earthquakes, Seaquakes and tidal waves can also be caused by human fault, such as by explosions and by underground, submarine, or above-ground bomb explosions, as well as by other artificially induced concussions in the rocks and soil of the planet. Wars in which bomb explosions and detonations, etc., take place always trigger earthquakes or land and sea quakes. However, such tremors also result in submarine landslides worldwide, which also trigger enormous tidal waves. That, in addition to purely natural submarine landslides. Huge tidal waves are therefore not only created as seismic waves by submarine quakes, but also by volcanic eruptions, by the vibrations of large machines, by all kinds of violent explosions, also during mine construction, etc., as well as by submarine landslides, which trigger particularly huge tidal waves that can be hundreds of meters high.
The tidal waves are called a tsunami in Japanese, which is always translated as big wave in the harbor, etc. But as Quetzal once explained to me, this meaning is not correct, because tsunami means flood, or simply big water, or big wave. This was also confirmed to me by various Japanese. Such tidal waves are caused by seaquakes when water movements surge up on the seabed and continue to the sea surface, where they spread out in a ring at high speed, with wavelengths that can reach many hundreds of kilometers and even cross several oceans. And as you said, tsunamis in the open sea have only a low wave height, but then they accumulate on coasts and reach enormous heights. Tides can also produce tidal waves of devastating effect, especially when meteorological causes such as changes in wind and air pressure cause storm surges. Large tidal waves are also caused by the combined action of the moon and sun. The sudden rise of the water level as an effect of the tide is known to me, for example, in the estuary of rivers, like among others the tidal wave in the Pororoca River in the Amazon, which I was allowed to observe with Quetzal, whereby this tidal wave raced far into the Amazon region. These are periodic phenomena that cause severe flooding and destruction again and again, but also cost human lives, although it is actually known that the tidal waves come again and again. But the stupidity of humans just knows no bounds, because even when they know the danger, they recklessly oppose it, because they simply carelessly, thoughtlessly, and foolishly, as well as irresponsibly, disregard the danger of the whole thing. But the aid organizations are also irresponsible, because they collect immense financial resources when natural disasters and so on occur. And I find them irresponsible because they always collect millions of dollars, but only about half of that is used for the actual purpose of the aid, while about 40% or more is withheld to pay the aid workers horrendous salaries and administration. In my opinion, this should be prohibited, because if aid is to be provided, then it must be done selflessly by the people or the people who help, without them being paid for it with donations. The situation would be different if aid organizations and their workers and assistants, which are convened by governments and paid for by the state, were to provide aid.
I agree with this, because what the aid organizations on the earth are achieving by using donations to pay their people, and by diverting very large amounts in percentage terms for this purpose, is unparalleled in its disgracefulness. A real help by aid organizations outside of a state custody can only be given if the help in every respect is carried out purely voluntarily without remuneration. Human beings who are paid by donations for all kinds of help to human beings in need are nothing but hypocritical elements and parasites who want to earn their living from the great need and misery of their fellow human beings. And exactly this is true of all those members of all aid organizations who organize their business and their remuneration through donations from those who honestly and compassionately offer their donations and assume that they would actually be used extensively for the affected needy. However, donors are fundamentally deceived in this respect, because their donations go largely into the aid organization's own pockets for employee salaries and administration. Such action should be forbidden, because it is right that all donations, down to the last cent, should only be used for direct aid, whereby the active personal commitment of the helpers in every respect should only be voluntary and without remuneration, in the same wise as you do in your group of the Figu Association. And what you said about observing tidal waves with Quetzal in the Amazon, I know that you have also directly observed various tidal waves. Spring tides and storm surges with him and my daughter Sim Ya say in different countries, and that you could not be dissuaded from being helpful in recovering many dead.
That is not what I wanted to talk about, my friend, because it always brings up unpleasant memories. So let us leave it at that, please. Quetzal once told me that what you just said is the case with you. All the help you receive from the population is voluntary, if any help is needed in case of disasters that you cannot prevent with your high technology. On the other hand, however, you have also organized everything by the state, working together with the people who are helping.
Excuse me, dear friend, because it was not my intention to torment you with memories. Then forget about it. You have been correctly informed as to the matters mentioned. Many thousands are buried so deeply under mud, and many thousands more are torn out into the sea so that they are never found again.
And what about the threat of plagues? What will they be if that happens?
Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, and malaria would be the ones that are most likely to occur in such cases. Cholera and typhus, as well as dysentery, are caused by contaminated water, while dysentery can also occur as a result of infection by flies and malaria by the Anopheles mosquito. But you know that.
Of course. But one more thing. Humans killed by drowning, but also others, in hot countries become bloated very quickly, often burst open imperceptibly and release cadaveric poison. Cadaveric fluid leaks out and seeps into the groundwater. Thus, dead human bodies and animal carcasses contaminate stagnant water just as bacterially as groundwater, and thus drinking water. If this water is then swallowed unintentionally by people or drunk consciously, then the epidemics you mentioned will break out among them, along with other diseases, which can then possibly cost tens of thousands of lives.
That is correct.
Then I would like to talk to you again about the last days of December. Are there still serious things happening in the world?
Yes, I wanted to talk about that. Because through a foresight, we know the following. In the last few days of December, there will be more suicide attacks in Iraq, with 2 attacks in particular, because they will be of a special nature. Saudi Arabia will not be spared either. For in the capital Riyadh, an attack by the Al-Qaeda terrorist network on the Ministry of the Interior will take place, but the assassins will be killed by police forces. And what will also be extraordinary is a major fire in South America, in the city of Buenos Aires, in which around 200 human beings will die because an irresponsible owner of the building has it completely sealed off, fearing that guests of the building would flee without paying. But what has been said should be enough, because time is far advanced. Goodbye, dear friend.
Then see you next week. Take care, Ptah, my friend. Still best regards to all. Sahlomie.